In 1993, in a small town in Kentucky, 28-year-old Savannah had her life all figured out. She had just graduated college from a very prestigious university school, and soon after graduating, she was accepted into a career as a nurse so she could pursue her goal as a psychiatric nurse. She was already making plans to get her own home, and around this time, Savannah was also proposed by her boyfriend Tom, whom she had met at this prestigious university. Basically, she was living her dream life. Savannah also had a younger sister named Judith, whom was 25 years of age and was bouncing from college to college, not knowing what career to take, and no job or real life goals, and no significant other. She had always been very hateful and jealous of her older sister because she wished she had the same mindset as her sister, and quite frankly was jealous of her and her relationship with Tom because no guy ever tried talking to Judith, and she really wanted a beautiful relationship like her sister Savannah. A year later, Savannah and her fiance, Tom, decide to get married, and around this time, they had both saved enough money to buy a home around the suburbs of Kentucky. Tam had also just graduated and got a job as an engineer for a mechanical company. Judith was still in the same boat, stuck and with no real dream and chasing love at the same time. And this grew a huge burden on Judith because she felt overwhelmed and she just viewed everything in a negative way. And Judith was beginning to have even more jealousy and hate towards her sister Savannah because she was now getting married and her and Tom were having a big wedding. They had invited all of the family members and friends to their ceremony, and it was a big deal for Judith because she wished she was in her sister's position, for her to be the one getting married. A month before the wedding, Savannah and Tom had gone to one of the local wedding dress boutiques to pick out a dress for Savannah and for Tom's suit. Savannah ended up finding a very beautiful dress that was on display on one of the racks and was the only dress in that boutique of that kind and with a unique look, and immediately caught the attention of Savannah. And she decided to make a purchase for that very rare and unique dress that had her just, quite frankly, breathtaking. Savannah buys the dress, and Tom also buys a suit for the wedding. They both make their purchases and walk out of the boutique and drive off home. The next day, Savannah can't wait but to tell her sister Judith about her new dress. She's excited and happy about her wedding with Tom. She calls her sister Judith to meet her at her house at around 6 p.m. To show her the dress she had just bought for her wedding. And Savannah, she elaborates and is thrilled about her new dress that she really wants to show her sister Judith. And Judith tells Savannah, okay, I'll come over. And she doesn't really seem excited about it. She just tells her sister, okay, I'll see you at your house at 6. And remember, Judith has always been super jealous of her older sister. So she's not too excited. She only puts a fake front to make it seem like she's truly happy for her sister. And Savannah, being her older sister, has always looked out for her little sister and quite frankly doesn't realize the hate Judith really has towards her. And so 6 p.m. hits the clock and Judith arrives to her sister's home, and Savannah opens the door and her sister Judith walks in and doesn't seem happy or excited to see her sister's dress, or even about the news of her big wedding day with Tom. Savannah asks her sister, what's wrong? Are you feeling okay? And she's worried for her sister, but Judith just tells her, yeah, I'm fine. I've just been feeling a little under the weather lately. Today I've had a headache all day, and in reality, this wasn't true from Judith. She was only saying this as a cover-up for her hate towards her sister Savannah. Judith smiles to her sister as soon as she asks her if she's okay. Savannah tells her sister Judith she can't wait until the wedding and she would like her to be a part of it and be one of the bridesmaids. Judith pauses for a moment and kind of overthinks it for a minute, and then replies with, I would love to, but I have to work that day. And Savannah doesn't question her. She just tells her, okay, well, let me know if you can, or you can make some type of arrangement with your job. And let me know as soon as you can before I start gathering all of my bridesmaids. Because I would just really love for you to be one of my bridesmaids. And Savannah doesn't think too much of it, but she begins to wonder if Judith may be possibly lying to her, since she knows her sister Judith very well and knows she hasn't had a job or been working anywhere lately. Savannah then invites Judith for dinner since she had just cooked up a meal for her and Tom when Tom gets back from his work. And Judith tells her, no, sister, it's okay. I really have to get going now. I have something important to do. And decides to leave instead as soon as she can. Savannah is a little let down because she was so excited to show her sister her new wedding dress, and because she didn't seem happy for her sister. So Judith says goodbye to her sister and leaves, in such a rush and a hurry that Savannah finds it a little odd, but again doesn't try to overthink of why Judith may be acting this way. The day of the wedding comes, and Savannah, through the whole ordeal and planning for her wedding, was never able to convince her sister Judith to be a part of the bridesmaids. And Judith, out of nowhere, without notice, she arrives to her sister's wedding later that day, while the festivities after the wedding ceremony are still taking place. And Savannah sees her sister arriving and tells her, I thought you were working today. Judith tells her, oh, I got off earlier than expected and I couldn't miss your wedding. I love you, sister, and I just didn't want to leave it last minute for me to be a part of the bridesmaids. Savannah, either way, is happy and excited that her little sister was able to make it on this very important date for her and welcomes her sister Judith into her home. And both sisters walk inside the home where the festivities are taking place. And Savannah is excited and bubbly and just having a really great time. And Judith is still showing not much emotion. She's smiling, but you can still notice she's not really there. She's almost acting very transparent and not very excited, as she should be for her sister's wedding, since it's a very important day. Everyone is sipping wine and glasses of champagne and eating steak and lobster for the dinner and all the right toppings. Savannah is sipping on a fine glass of champagne and she tells her sister if she can hold her glass for a few minutes because she has to use the restroom. And Savannah hands over the glass of champagne to Judith, and Judith is just standing there and waits. She waits a few minutes and notices that Savannah still isn't out of the bathroom, and immediately hides behind one of the corners of the house, holding, in the meantime, Savannah's glass in hand. And she sneakily takes out a small bottle of liquid arsenic, which is a poison liquid. She pulls the poison liquid out of her purse and she opens it up and pours it inside the champagne glass and stirs it a little and then walks back immediately to where she was standing before. And no one in the room had a chance to see what Judith was doing, so it's like if nothing ever happened. Savannah then walks out of the restroom and her sister Judith is smiling and gives her glass back to Savannah. And Judith tells her, I'm very excited for you and I love you, sister. Savannah thanks her sister Judith and Savannah takes a few sips of her champagne and they both walk to where all the guests are eating and drinking their wine and champagne and enjoying the music and just having a great time. About half an hour after Judith had poured the poison and Savannah is sipping on her glass of champagne, Savannah begins to feel lightheaded and tells Tom that she doesn't feel well and that she feels like she's about to pass out and faint. And Tom is worried for her. She tells her to drink some water and that he's gonna go outside to the fridge real quick in the garage where they keep the cold waters. And as soon as Tom leaves, Savannah faints and collapses onto the ground. And all the guests are terrified and yell for help and start to panic at what has just happened. And Judith is just standing there pretending like she doesn't know what happened and yells out to Tom to inform him that Savannah had just collapsed onto the floor. They immediately call the police and ambulance and they pronounce Savannah dead on scene. A few months pass and the autopsy report could never identify what really happened to Savannah that day of her wedding, so they just determined her death as unknown. The day of Savannah's funeral ceremony, after the ceremony is over, Judith, Savannah's sister, tells the funeral chapel if she could stay alone in the room with her sister for a few minutes. Just one last time, and she's making a scene and fake tears begin to roll down her face, and she quietly goes back into the room, closes and locks the door, and starts taking off Savannah's wedding dress. She's very quick about it and stashes it inside her purse, closes the casket and walks out. A few months pass and Tom is still left all alone in his home where he lived with his wife Savannah, and one day Judith decides to go over to Tom's house, and Tom is still really hurt by Savannah's death and he's surprised that Judith shows up out of nowhere. And Judith is all smiles and being extra friendly, and she's wearing a really short skirt, a really provocative and skimpy skirt, and trying to tempt Tom. She walks in and hugs Tom, and Tom is quite surprised at this since it's been so long since the passing of Savannah that he doesn't know what to make of this. But he thinks, well, maybe she's just trying to consolate me and get my spirits up, since it's my wife's sister. But Judith ends up being extra flirty with Tom and doesn't think too much of it. Tom is just bereaved and is still immediately grieving Savannah's death. But he asks Judith if she wants a drink of wine, and she accepts, of course, and Tom gets the wine glasses, serves up two glasses of red Moscato, and they both sit down in the living room and just begin talking about Savannah's death. Judith at one point begins to tell Tom that she's really not feeling this conversation because she doesn't want to keep reliving the terrible quote unquote tragedy that happened the day of her wedding. Tom tells her, I've just been working a lot lately trying to find inner peace with myself, but it's been very rough on me lately. And Judith asks him if he would like to go out later during the weekend for dinner so they can talk some more. And Tom accepts. And over time, about a month later, Tom and Savannah's sister Judith become very good friends, and they eventually fall for each other and begin a relationship. And also eventually Judith moves in with Tom, and a little after they decide to get married through a civil ceremony. And Judith tells Tom that she doesn't want company, she wants it only to be them two. And he says, okay. And eventually the day of the ceremony arrives, and Judith wakes up early that day before Tom wakes up to pull out her sister Savannah's dress from her car so she can wear for her wedding. She walks quietly into the house and into the room and hides the dress so she can wear later that day. And this all happens at around 6 a.m. So Tom is still asleep, and the wedding day they planned begins at 12 p.m. Tom wakes out of bed at around 9:30, They both eat breakfast and then get ready and dressed. At around 11 p.m., they are both ready to head out the door. Judith walks out the room wearing the dress, and Tom is just staring at Judith. And he tells her, "Wow, that dress looks awfully a lot like your sister's dress." And Judith tells him, "Yeah, it does. It's the same dress I bought, the same one. I really liked my sister's Savannah's dress, and I decided to purchase one that looks just like it." And Tom doesn't think too much of it because they only have an hour before the ceremony, and they both drive off to the chapel, which is 30 minutes away. And they arrive and walk inside the chapel, and as both of them are making their way inside the chapel, Judith starts to feel lightheaded and her body temperature rises and she begins breathing heavy and running low on air, and all of a sudden she collapses onto the ground, just like her sister Savannah. Tom is shocked and terrified by all this, almost in a deja vu nightmare, and immediately calls the police and the ambulance, and they arrive, and when they arrive, Judith is already deceased and dead on scene. Tom gets the autopsy reports a few weeks later, and her death is also unknown, and Tom is distraught because it happened to him twice already. But he gets good news several days later when he receives a call from the coroner's office saying that they were able to finally identify Savannah's death and that it was due to poisoning. And Tom is consumed, but he starts to put two and two together and realizes that possibly Judith had something to do with it, since the day she went to go visit him at his home, she was dressed really provocative and acting very flirty and skimpy. Something not quite right fit the picture, and he begins to wonder if Judith was just trying to get at him for his money, since Judith was never known to have a job and she was quite frankly lazy. She always acted very mysterious. To this day, no one truly knows what happened to Judith. People also speculate that maybe it was some type of hereditary disease that both sisters had. Or maybe Judith got a panic attack thinking about her sister Savannah as she was wearing her dress and walking into the chapel. So, could this have been the spirit of Savannah haunting her sister and coming back for revenge? That's the end of this story, folks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, share, and turn on all notifications for more stories. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.